So a few weeks ago, when Dave, we were here and Dave gave the wee kind of intro that we were going to be working our way through the I am statements, he spoke about John's gospel and how it was structured and how there's very little, if anything, in John's gospel that's not really well thought through. I would encourage you today to go away and read some of the verses and some of the passages that I'm going to reference. And because I've just done the Good Shepherd, I would encourage you as well to go away and read that and compare it against Ezekiel 34. And you can begin to see the way in which John was alluding to these old texts to say something and to remind us of something of Jesus and his identity. So, of course, John 15 is no different. When Jesus stands and he says, I am the true vine, and you are the branches. He's alluding to other texts. What he's doing essentially is he's leaving as a wee hyperlink. We all love those in an email, don't we? Just me. So, of course, I'm going to start in Jeremiah. Now, the metaphor and the analogy of vine is all through the Old Testament. It's actually everywhere. Once you see it, you can't not see it. Almost. So I'm not going to touch on them all because we could be here for 3 hours, and I'm sure none of us want that, at least of all me. So the first of them is in Jeremiah, where we see Israel compared to the vine. And God says, I planted you as a fruit-bearing vine, entirely true. So the way I've structured my slides today is the verses are going to sit side by side so as that you can see in John 15 what's being said, and you can compare that against what's being said in those earlier texts. The next is in Isaiah 5. Again, we see God as the vine dresser in John 15. If we compare that against Isaiah 5, God is the vine dresser. In Isaiah, Israel is the vine. It goes on to say that he will remove that which does not bear fruit. And the fruit that he called them to bear was justice and righteousness. And you can begin to see the ways in which these texts begin to overlap. The text from John 15 and Isaiah 5. Going to jump into Ezekiel 15. Again, we see God as the vine dresser. Israel described as the vine. And here we see language about branches being pruned and burned in a fire. And again, if we compare that against the verses in John, you begin to see the ways in which they overlap. It's not accidental. Ezekiel 17, God is the vine dresser. This time, however, the royal house of Judah is the vine. Big Fraser's dropping everything today. The royal house of Judah is the vine as opposed to the nation. The branches described in Ezekiel 17 are the chief men and the envoys of the king. But ultimately, for their disobedience and their straying from God and his will for them, the vine dresser destroys the vine for not producing fruit. And again, we see that sit over the top of John 15. It's all going off this morning. I'm loving it. Ezekiel 19, again, we see this same imagery and these same metaphors sit over the top of one another. Where we see the royal house of Judah as the vine, as opposed to the nation, similar to 17. The branches are the royal princes, and the withered branches are consumed by fire. So I'm hoping that by now you're beginning to see John 15 is making allusions to all of these earlier texts. So in the New Testament, at times they would directly quote the Old. But a lot of the time what you're seeing is these subtle references, these hyperlinks that the original hearer and the early believers in the church, when they seen and heard these things, it would have instantly sent alarm bells off in their head. And they would have been going, the true vine, that's Jeremiah, and that's Ezekiel, and that's Isaiah. They would have known this stuff. It would not have been lost on them. We see God's heart in the birthing of the nation in Isaiah chapter 5. In verse 7 it says, "For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are his pleasant planting. And he looked for justice, but behold bloodshed, for righteousness, but behold an outcry." And again, those verses in Jeremiah where it says that he willed them to bear fruit and to be entirely true. All through the Old Testament, we see the recurring theme of Israel's disobedience, social injustice, and their failure to uphold the covenant. We see a complex interplay of love, discipline, and redemption that reflects God's commitment to his chosen people. Now, I've spent all of this week wrestling over this next part because it's not lightly that I bring it. And I did run it through a few solid, trustable individuals. But when I looked at these verses, and I looked at God's heart for the nation, for his people, and that it would be that they would enact justice and that they would walk in a right spirit and that they would bear fruit that was entirely true, I couldn't help but think in the current conflict that we see in that part of the world. And then it caused me then to think back to Genesis 12. And in Genesis 12, we see Abraham giving up his place in his father's household, therefore forfeiting his security. Abraham was placing his very survival, his identity, and his future in the hands of God. But he receives this promise: "I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing." You see, God's heart has always been for his people to act justly, to walk in a right spirit, to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God, it says in Micah. It's always been God's will that his people carry themselves in that way. So I hope you can forgive me for making the comparison between that and what we see currently unfold in that part of the world, and ask ourselves what fruit is being born there. I see bloodshed and I see outcry. And I'm not, please hear me, folks, I'm not anti-Israel. I'm not here looking to bash them. I'm just simply making the comparison between these and asking what fruit is being born there. Shane Claiborne, an American minister and evangelist, commented on it week before last. And he said this: "The world stood with Israel after the merciless slaughter and terror of October 7th. But he goes on to say, we cannot kill children to show that the killing of children is wrong. In battling the beast, we must not become the beast." And this part of the message today has had me up at 6 o'clock almost every morning. Like really wrestling with it and really thinking about it and going, do I actually want to stand and say that? And I felt it right. I felt it right to make this comparison because God wills and calls us to bear fruit, and that to bear fruit that brings life as opposed to death. I want to bring it even closer to home. We have systems in place right now in our nation that make it near impossible for people to seek asylum. And I want to ask the question, is that acting justly? Is that walking in kindness? Is that loving mercy? Because Phil and myself and others at City Mission, and I'm sure some of us in this room, work in environments every day where we see individuals present who are fleeing the most horrific of circumstances, and they're met with these consistent barriers. I want to bring it even closer home still and ask, in what ways am I, as an individual, in what ways are we, the church, partnering with systems of injustice? Partnering with things that seek to oppress people, as opposed to bring life and freedom and liberation. We've touched on that. God's plan was always for redemption. Ezekiel 17 is another interesting one, because in Ezekiel 17, in the parable, we see the absolute devastation of Israel because of their disobedience, because of their walking away from God's will. He brings the nation almost to ashes. But these verses here give us the promise of a redemption. Now, I'm going to struggle to see this here. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I myself will take a shoot from the very top of a cedar and plant it. I will break off a tender sprig from its topmost shoots and plant it on a high and lofty mountain. On that mountain height of Israel, I will plant it. It will produce branches and bear fruit and become a splendid cedar. Birds of every kind will nest in it. They will find shelter in the shade of its branches. All the trees of the forest will know that I, the Lord, bring down the tall tree and make the low tree grow tall. I dry up the green tree and make the dry tree flourish. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. You see, God is consistently, I think, coming in and wiping up our mess. And I think here we see that, where God promises to establish something of that line of David. And then Jesus stands and he says, I am the true vine. So I hope that by now you can see the ways in which we've compared and contrasted the texts that we've looked at, and the implication then of Jesus standing and saying exactly this. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away, and every branch in me that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. It was not an accident that John structured it in this way. We were always intended to think back. This quote here, Jesus' description of himself as the true vine can be explained as his appropriation of the privilege and status of Israel to himself. Jesus was Israel as Israel ought to have been. A choice vine producing fruit consistent with his identity. The Jesus portrayed in the fourth gospel is, from the first lines of the gospel onwards, revealed as a divine figure who has come into the world to bring light and salvation. He is fully conscious of his divine origin and destiny, and he proclaims his divinity openly to all who will listen and to many who will not. You okay? Happy days. So let's just comment some on John 15. So the vine dresser does two things. He removes the branches that do not bear fruit, and he prunes the others in order that they may bear even more fruit. The even more here, I think, is the blessing of others and the advancing of his kingdom. I had a phone call this week from a guy that I've been working with. I've probably been working with him now for, must be 3 years. He has made no commitment to faith. He's not closed off to the things of faith at all. His famous line to me is, "Davey, I'm a Bonadette guy. And God's maybe just a wee bit too far off for me." So we've walked with him and journeyed with him for a very, very long time, and we've supported him, and we got him away to rehab, and he got free of drugs, and he came out, and he, for a period of time, stayed in one of our flats, and he managed it really well, and he was back involved with his wee girl, and he was being a dad, and we got him into work, and everything's going really well for him. It's not been without struggle, and he's had his challenges, all of which he's been incredibly honest about. If I've asked him if he's struggling, he's always says, "Yeah, I'm struggling," or "Yeah, I'm fine, Davey." So he phoned me midweek, start of the week, sorry, and he said, "Davey, are you happy?" And I was like, "Depends what time of day you ask me. Like, if you ask me in the middle of getting the Wayne's ready for school, it's probably going to be a no. But overall, am I happy? Is that what you mean?" And he says, "Aye, Dave, that's what I'm meaning." And I said, "Absolutely buzzing most days." He says, "Have you got peace?" And I said, "Well, you know me, so you're probably better equipped to comment on whether you think I'm somebody who has peace or not." And he was like, "Well, I kind of think you do, Davey." And I was like, "Well, you would be right. I have got peace. My life isn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I have peace." And then I asked him a question. I said, "Right, like, what's this conversation? What's leading up to it?" And he says to me, "Davey, I've been clean before. And I've been clean for long periods, and I've held down jobs." And he was like, "But I'm not happy." He was like, "And I can almost just see the fall about to come." He was like, "I know myself well enough. I know my habits and my mindsets well enough." And he was like, "But I really don't want to date Davey. So I'm thinking that this God guy might be the answer." And it's been a pretty challenging week at work this week, but see that? It was amazing. I sat down with him on Wednesday, and we had, I think, one of the best chats that we've ever had about faith and just Bonadette stuff. You don't get to know God overnight. For some people, they get blessed like that. For the most of us, it's a thing that we work at. I said, "Are you up for reading the Bible?" And he went, "Whoa. Hold on, Davey. Let's work our way up." So I said, "Right, okay." So I've bought him the Ragamuffin Gospel, Brennan Manning's book. And my hope is that as he reads the pages of Manning's book, he catches something of the love of the Father, and the boy is changed. And he can go on a journey of knowing peace and being happy and knowing joy, because that's what comes in him, isn't it? Now, I'm not telling you that by accident. This is a hyperlink, because what I want is every single person in this room committed to praying for him. He's a beautiful soul. He has shaped the work that we do at the City Mission, and particularly the project I manage, in ways that I don't even know that he's aware of. He's a cracking guy. He's got so much to offer, and he needs to know Jesus in the way that we in this room know, because it's the only thing that's going to buy the boy peace. It's the only thing that's going to transform his life. Jesus says, "Abide in me." If we are connected to Jesus, then what's in him will come through us. Abide means a daily personal relationship with Jesus. It's literally the reason we were created. It's the primary purpose of his creation, is to know and to abide in him. Now, this is a risky one, but I'm going to go with it. If I abided, is that a word? If I abided in my marriage the way I abide with Jesus, do you think I would stay married very long? The answer's no. That's the truth of it, folks. Because Jesus is calling us to a place in this of utter dependence on him, of all of our being in him, of all of our thought process in him, of all of our decisions in him, of all of the running of our home and our families in him, and not just periods in the week where we take a wee time out. It's a radical leaning into and dependence upon. If I only spent time with Amanda twice a week, do you think that would lead to a happy wife, happy life scenario? Or do you think eventually she would be saying, right, David, I need some more. I need you to abide with me a bit more. And I need this relationship to become ever more intimate. Yeah? Good. Some of you are on the same page. Some of you want to kill me right now, but it's all right. Verse 10, Jesus says, these things I have spoken to you. I am the vine, you are the branches, abide in me. Why? That my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. We call our daughter Joy, I've said this to you before, not by accident. We called her Joy as a declaration to our household every single time we say her name, because we have joy in his kingdom. Like, we're not baptized into lemon juice. We are born again afresh by his Spirit, and we can know peace, love, good things, and joy all the days of our life. I used to think, we have to suffer in this life and then we get to enjoy him forever in heaven, and that's the deal. And actually, the longer I've been doing it, the more I'm realising that no, I get to enjoy the kingdom here on this earth, and then I'm birthed into it forever in eternity. It's not one or the other, it's an and an or kind of idea. Show of hands if you need joy. Man alive, you should have 2 hands up. Say. Here's the thing. We don't have to work that hard for it. Because Jesus says, if you abide in me, this happens as a natural byproduct. This is all part of Jesus' farewell discourse. And it's important for us to remember that, because it was some of the last conversations he was having with his disciples. So it's pretty important in Jesus that he passed this on. And I think we need to embrace it today with the same level of severity. Abiding is not a passive thing. It requires us to participate in the life of Christ. So I'm going to get all holy a minute. Because, again, in a paper that I wrote last year, I wrote on this thing called theosis. I think I told you about it. I almost joined the Eastern Orthodox Church. Amanda saved me. But it's this beautiful process where, as we live and have our being in Christ, we actually cleave and become like him. Where you can't discern where we end and he begins, it just becomes the same thing. And we are transformed into his likeness over a process. In 2 Peter it says that we partake in this divine nature. And the idea is that the nature in us becomes truly divine and shapes every other part of our lives. It's the process of us becoming one with him. How do we know if this is happening? Well, it says in John that love would flow from us. Actually, verse 17, it says it's a command. It's not even like, oh, you can opt in or out of this. He's like, no, love. And it sounds like hard work to me. But there's a promise in verse 23. There's a promise of a helper whose purpose it is to come and empower us and to grow us in order that we would become his people and we would minister to this world in ways that he leads, in goodness, in righteousness, in justice, in faithfulness, and in joy. God's desire is that all of his people bear fruit. Before, this was only possible through being part of the vine, Israel. Now the fruit will only come through our abiding in Jesus, the true vine. His people are those who hear his words, obey, and produce fruit. So in finishing, just two dead simple questions. In what way, I've said you, but in what way are we abiding in the true vine? And are we bearing fruit? Because I don't want to be one of the branches that ends up in the burning fire, to put it bluntly. I want to make sure that I am open to him and that he's speaking to me and that he knows that no part of my life is shut down to him. That he can shape and mold me as he wills in order that I would bear fruit. So I'm going to pray there. I had a couple of more thoughts, but I'm not going to. Father, thank you that your purpose for your creation is that we can know you, that we can know joy, that we can know peace, and that we can know comfort. Father, for those of us in the room who maybe don't feel or know or have experienced that, would you reveal yourself to us, Lord? For those of us that do, would we hunger and thirst the more so? Father, bless us. Bless your people. Father, we pray for those parts of our world that are torn and that are in pain. Father, I pray for families and children, especially in those parts of the world, that you would protect them, Lord, that they would be safe, that they would be blind to the circumstances playing out around them. Father, prevent another generation growing up with the trauma and the pain of war. Reveal to us, Lord, the areas where we partnership with systems of injustice. Take each of us on a journey of becoming more and more and more like you. Amen.